Hi, Geography. I'm here to talk to you about settlement patterns, particularly where we settle and why. Before we get to that, though, we should probably talk about the different types of settlement patterns. So I brought some technology here, tape, and just going to put that up over whatever's in the background today. So the first type of settlement pattern we need to talk about is I think one of the most frequent or most noticeable settlement patterns. It's linear. It goes like this. It's a line, and usually this follows a natural feature, say a river or a coastline, and then you get settlements. Those are settlements along the coastline or along the river, and this is a popular, or I guess a widely used settlement method that happens because you have to settle along rivers for a number of reasons. Now, this method of settlement, just gonna get rid of that, is used around the world. Here's a map of the world at night. You'll see there's a whole bunch of linear patterns there. Over here in Russia, which I can only assume is right there, there's a long line of lights. That's the Trans-Siberian Railway. So you can see linear patterns both along man-made structures and linear patterns along natural features like rivers and most evidently coastlines of the world, as the map of the world basically shows the coastlines lit up, and you can make out all of the continents. So this is also exemplified in the long lots of Quebec. There's a picture of them. Essentially, it's also known as the seigneurial system, but essentially along the St. Lawrence River, the river afforded easy transportation. Moving along waterways is often far cheaper than moving by land. There's less effort to maintain a waterway than there is, say, to maintain a road network and infrastructure that goes along with it. So the seigneurial system, or the long lots of Quebec, travel along the St. Lawrence, and essentially everybody would have their farmstead or their building that they live in. We'll call it a house, that's what we'll call it. And the barns and everything would be along the river with easy access to transportation, and all the farming would be further up, and then you have forest far off in a distance away from the river. Another form of settlement pattern is called dispersed, sometimes also called centralized. Anyways, this pattern looks like this. Here's a resource. It's oil. I guess that's not really on demand nowadays, but let's say it was. You'd establish a settlement near the place where you can find the oil, and then there'd be whatever transportation network you'd have, and then other settlements that kind of lead to that. So centralized settlements that are then dispersed from each other, kind of established like that. Another example that we learned about in class was Sudbury. They have a nickel mine up there, and so natural resources tend to bring settlements as well, but they don't necessarily follow along a natural feature that lends to transportation. More, it's something that is valuable. So that's another settlement pattern there. In Ontario, we kind of follow the pattern of Quebec with establishment of settlements along bodies of water. For instance, this map of Toronto shows the establishment of Toronto in 1815, 1818. They called it York back then, but all the buildings are along the waterfront. Later, you have the development of a lot of industry and warehousing all along the waterfront. That's because Lake Ontario, again, offers that easy transportation network. When railroads begin to be used in North America, those railroads tended to be set up along that lakeshore too. If you look nowadays, where's our major railroad? Where's Union Station? It's all along the lakeshore. That has to do with the fact that it's the existing industry was already there. Land was a little bit easier to build on because of the lack of topography or variations in hills and so on near the shoreline versus when you go inland. But essentially, the lake is what determined how all those industries got established at that lake shore. So that's kind of how industry decided where we live in Toronto. Looking more broadly, though, why people choose to live there where they live is, I mean, it's determined by the industries that they're involved in. For instance, for manufacturing, typically you get manufacturing established near raw materials in the case of Sudbury. You can also get manufacturing established where there's a plentiful labor supply, there's power, and there's easy transport. A good example of this is the Ford plant in Oakville. Picture, there we are. So the Ford plant in Oakville is on land that is not super valuable like the land in downtown Toronto. Building a manufacturing plant in downtown Toronto would be expensive, incredibly expensive, but it's still on valuable land. It's very close to Toronto, both via river and via rail network, and it's close to a large labor supply, which is why you get the establishment of all these major factories in the suburbs of Toronto rather than in the major city itself. Similarly, the industries that establish in Toronto are those industries that don't demand as much land, but still need a labor supply. These are your bank towers of the downtown core, the tertiary industries, whether it's doing what I'm doing, teaching, but it's more like things like innovation and banking and I guess more broadly commerce and government mechanics as well. So you get those structures usually set up in major cities, and around the really big cities you get the establishment of manufacturing. So that kind of gives a little bit of rationale for why manufacturing is located where it is versus why like political centers and tertiary jobs that are associated with innovation are usually in more condensed big cities.